So today I want to welcome Sophie for an interview. We're going to talk about some shifts she's had in her life and just give us a little background about herself. And then we'll just get into however the conversation flows. And usually we come across some pretty interesting material and insights. So we'll see how this goes. But first, I just want to introduce Sophie.
Hi there. First of all, thank you, Angelo, for speaking to me on this. I'm really excited. I'm not sure what's going to come up or what we're going to say, but yeah, I have a good feeling about it.
Yeah, I never know either, which is really kind of funny.
Yeah,
But so I guess
it's so
maybe just give
nice
us
to
a little
actually be.
background.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's
Yeah.
so nice to for once actually be so unprepared for something.
Yeah, I'm chronically unprepared when it comes to talking about this subject. I literally never almost plan anything ever. So, um, which is really wonderful because we can just talk from this moment and not have to bring any baggage in or anything like that. So,
Yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
maybe give us a little background about yourself, like where you grew up, what sort of childhood did you have, and what interests did you have when you were growing up and so forth.
Sure. Okay. I grew up in London, really, really centrally. So, right sort of smack bang in the middle of London. So, sort of very busy. And I guess I always start with sort of saying that from a very young age, I sort of encountered sort of the experience of death a lot because so it's not a sort of sounds weird starting off on such a morbid thing, but in a way it wasn't. But my father died when I was three, and then sort of 18 months later, my younger brother died, who was yeah, a few years younger than me. Um, so that sort of already sort of paints quite a morbid picture, but it wasn't actually really like that. But I do think that that was quite a defining thing, as I guess it would be for anyone really. But part of this sort of journey, sort of towards awakening for sure. So I grew up sort of just with my mum. It was just my mum and I. We sort of we lived really centrally in London. It was a very sort of loving relationship, very open, very sort of relaxed household. It was sort of quite nice, just her and myself. Um, and I guess with that, I spent a lot of time on my own, so I had a lot of time to think about things and ponder on things. Um, yeah, I don't know how long you want me to sort of go on with
Sure. I was
background.
curious if you're open to talking about it a bit. Do you recall like what your perception of death was at that time when 3 years old is pretty young? Do you
Yeah,
remember the
well,
events? And
absolutely. So there wasn't a perception of death at that time. And so I guess, sort of, as a child, it was always unfolding this sort of learning about what it was. And initially, I don't remember my father actually dying and when he was suddenly not there. I don't have a memory for that. But I do remember asking my mother where he was. And I don't know how much later it was. You know, it could have been a year, could have been 6 months. I'm not really sure. But sort of, where is he and where's he gone? And I remember actually sitting in the back of the car we had at the time when we were sort of on this sort of flyover in London, and I was pointing to all these different buildings, saying, "Is he there? Is he there?" And we know where's he gone, and it must have been awful, for my mother. But I no, I just didn't have an understanding of sort of death or finality. But I guess because that then happened again with my brother, and it was so present in my experience that they had gone, that that fascination with death was, was from quite an early age, really. And the way I sort of learned about it, it was, I can't really remember how that happened, but, it was such a gradual unfolding process, really.
sure, yeah, it sounded like it was sort of just part of your identity and how you saw
Yeah,
things. It was naturally there. It didn't seem like it shouldn't be there, perhaps.
definitely. It was really like that. And I think it wasn't until I was sort of an older child, around, I don't know, 8, 9 sort of age, where I realised that other children hadn't sort of had this experience, or other people I knew. And and then then it started to feel weird, because then I felt like I was different, and why, and then that's when I sort of started questioning things more.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that we often have to have exposure to the sort of social program to start to perceive ourselves as, why am I different than that? How am I not the same as how I'm supposed to be or how others expect me to be? And how that really starts forming our identity in a lot of ways. It's fascinating, kind of tragic in certain ways too.
Yeah, no, it's really tragic. And I guess, in terms of how sort of children grow up, that is the sort of age where you start sort of realizing a bit of what your identity is about, and then, how you compare with others. And yeah, so it all sort of, yeah, there was a double whammy of that going on, really.
Mm, yeah. And you said that you spent a lot of time, or you had a lot of time in childhood to sort of contemplate, or I guess wonder about things. What sort of things were you curious about when you were younger?
Yeah, it's hard to sort of say anything tangibly, because especially when you're at that young age where everything, concepts haven't really formed, in terms of questioning tangible things. But I always sort of had this sense of wondering about things, and I've never slept well, and I think at night I used to sort of think about things. I had a very sort of busy mind trying to work things out, and I'm not quite sure what I was trying to work out, but something
Mm,
was going on.
yeah.
I remember having sort of weird perceptual experiences at night where I'd feel like really, really massive or really, really tiny. And I think that's, quite common, but I just remember them being really scary and freaky. And yeah, just being awake at night, having these sort of strange sensations, I guess. Um, and it's hard not
That's
to.
interesting. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, no, I was just saying it's hard to then not wonder what's going on when these sorts of things are happening. Um, Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, it's interesting with the perceptual shifts as a child and experiences of expansiveness, or even people describing non-dual experiences as a child very clearly. I think of a friend who recently had an awakening, actually. And when I mentioned this to him, he said, yes, I remember that as a child. I remember feeling like I was in two places at once, that there was not a separation between essentially subject and object. But I remember him saying he thought it was so weird he didn't talk about it, and then he kind of forgot about it. I
Yeah,
have another
exactly.
friend who, yeah, I
Mm.
have another friend who used to experience it all the time and would tell her parents about it, and they were so concerned they took her to multiple like psychologists and neurologists. They kept saying there's nothing wrong with her, but her parents were so concerned that she learned not to talk about it, and then she stopped experiencing it until later when she started experiencing it with realization. So it's amazing how
Yeah,
much kids are actually
yeah. I
have
mean,
that.
I wonder how many children have this, without anything, not necessarily being an only child or having death in their family, just as a normal experience. And we're not sort of so equipped to sort of look out for it and deal with it and validate it,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And then sort of, and when you were getting more towards adult age, or young adult age, what kind of interests did you have? Were you more focused on school? Were you interested in art, or did you start becoming interested in spirituality early? Or
I was interested in spirituality sort of early on, actually. So it was around, um, I started sort of feeling like something. Oh, actually, I know what it. I had this really strange experience. So I went to boarding school when I was 9, and I remember sort of starting to. Obviously, that was quite weird, and unpleasant in many ways. But somewhere along the line, I did start having some sort of fascination with something, and I'm not quite sure how I must have expressed it. It might have been a discontent or just something. I don't know, but I remember going to see the head teacher, headmistress, and it was a very strict Church of England school. And I can't remember, I wish I could remember what I actually said, but I remember her response. And that was, it sounds like you want to become closer to God. And I thought, God, I'm not sure about that. And, we used to pray every day, and I was not really into it. And this sort of filled me. I remember my body just felt sort of like, oh, no, in terms of the Christian God.
hmm,
I thought, no, it's not that at all. But as a child, in front of the headmistress, I was like, oh, yeah, maybe it's that,
yeah,
in my fickle way. of, just going along with, whatever you think. So I remember then having to enroll in confirmation classes and learning all this, stuff with the Bible. And that process was quite interesting when I look back on it, because I remember the day we were actually confirmed and we had to wear these sort of silly white veils, and I remember just feeling really self-conscious and idiotic wearing this stupid veil. So I was really not enjoying the day. And then finally we got to the service, and I remember the priest putting his hands on my head and saying, "I confirm you, whatever happens." And I really do mean this in no disrespectful way to people that, strongly believe this and have had good experiences with this at all. This is just my personal experience. And then talking about that afterwards with friends, we were like, "Oh yes, I felt this energy and this amazing thing that happened when the priest put his hands on my head." And actually, realistically, what happened for me was I just had this real knowing that I thought, no, this, for me, is not where it's at. This is, no. Basically, my sort of whole sort of being was just saying this big no. And then a couple of years later, I went to secondary school. And I'm not really sure what was going on in terms of my questioning and my curiosity, but I just did feel a bit different to others. I had, usual interests and good friendship groups. I don't think from the outside I would have stood out as being odd or anything. But I remember in the first few weeks of term at this new secondary school, and I'd started a year late. I joined in the sort of second year, so I felt a little bit self-conscious about that. But we're in this religious studies class, and the first lesson was on Buddhism, and we did the Four Noble Truths. And I sat there just with my jaw on the ground pretty much, because we did the Four Noble Truths, we did life is suffering, and then that story of Kisagotami, the mother who loses her child, and she visits all the houses to see whether there's been death or suffering, etc. And that just had a huge effect on me. I suddenly felt like, okay, this isn't just me. There's something out there that sort of understands what I think I'm going through. So that was a big moment, and I think that sort of first noble truth of life is suffering has always stayed with me. I haven't actually really moved beyond it onto anything else. It's just been my sort of mantra. So that was like, I would have been 12 at that point. But then, after that, it all just got lost, and I had a sort of pretty normal, average sort of teenage life. I was into music and sport and was pretty lazy with my studies, I would say. Definitely when I was in late teens, when we got to sort of A-levels or high school equivalent in the US, I couldn't really be bothered with work, and I just sort of winged it. And I still did, still loved my music. I played the piano and the clarinet and played, different sort of team sports and loved that. But, the work, I was definitely winging it for sure.
I can totally relate to that. I was that way myself. In high school, I liked science. There were things I liked, but I couldn't be bothered to, I was more interested in whatever, partying and social stuff and so forth. I had a couple things I wanted to say about what you said just a bit earlier. One is the experience in church. Actually, I totally resonate with that. My family was Catholic, but they didn't go to church by the time I was old enough to remember. My older sisters remembered it, so I didn't really have exposure to church in my family. But on occasion, someone from a Christian church or something would come up and try to talk to me and hand me a pamphlet and indoctrinate me on occasion. I had come into contact with people who did that on occasion, or I'd be with my friend whose family went to church, and I would go to church, and I always had that same reaction. It felt so strange to me. It felt like inauthentic, although I wouldn't have used that word then. I didn't know it. The interactions themselves felt not right. Something felt odd about it to me. And I hope that does not offend anybody, but it's my honest experience.
Sure,
and so I can totally resonate with that. I did want to ask you, when you said that something had happened or you had an experience or an insight of some kind that you mentioned to the headmistress, can you give any sense of what that was or what
What when she
your
first
insight was?
when I went to see her and she said, I think you want to be closer to God. Do you mean then?
Yeah, but I meant what the actual insight was you were trying to describe to her, or what you
Oh,
experienced.
I know. That's the weird things I can't remember.
Mm,
And I might have said something like, I feel like I'm looking for something and I don't know what it is, maybe.
hmm.
It might have been
Yeah,
something like that,
yeah.
that sort of
I
thing.
love
Like I
that.
did feel a little bit of restlessness. And around that age and a bit younger, I used to look at my school friends sometimes in the playground. I'd sort of stand back and they're all, playing and happy. And I would just stand there sometimes thinking, does anyone else like want to know what's going on at all? Like, you sort of stand back and think everyone's just doing their thing and accepting reality as it is. And I used to, just think, it still shocks me now. I just think, don't you
I'm
want
the
to
same way.
know? Like what
I
is
was a
going
kid,
on?
I was the same way. It was like a
Really?
combination of, what the hell is going on? Aren't you guys curious about this? Like, it was that, and also I could feel the suffering already. Like, even as a child, I could feel the suffering in adults around me, and it just
Yeah.
got more and more intense as I grew up. So it was like a combination of, why is everyone acting like they're not suffering? Or maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I felt like I could feel it. And like, yeah, how do everybody just seems to know what to do, but aren't you like curious about what the heck is really going on? Like, I always wanted to ask the big questions. I just never knew I did, and I didn't have permission to do it,
Yeah.
I guess. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it's not having that language to do it, or the sort of, there don't seem to be any outlets where you can do that anyway,
mhm.
any sort of interface with that allows you to do that or even encourages it. Because yeah, I would have been all over it if someone had said to me at that age, do you want to understand the meaning of life, or do you want to know a bit more about reality, or just if do you want to understand more about you or your experience? I'd be, absolutely 100%. I would have been there for sure. And
Right? It's so simple and obvious, isn't it?
yeah, definitely. And
But everyone's
even
avoiding it.
more,
Like, so many people avoid it. It's amazing.
yeah, and more so in my teens when, of course, there was all the sort of general angst. You just think, what is going on? Like, is it just me? And not just with the suffering, but the sort of whole, reality that we're human and there's this world and there's nature and look around us. Like, how has this come into existence? It was, sometimes quite a sort of, I don't know if metaphysical is the right word, but, I really, like the world, like why?
Yeah.
And everyone just seems to be bimbling along. And, I don't mean that in a uncompassionate way. There were, of course, there's suffering and all sorts, but in that sense of not really questioning. And then, of course, I felt there was something wrong with me because I didn't really get it. I wanted to question it, but didn't know how. So, yeah.
That's, it's funny, like, when I started talking about this subject, making videos and writing a book and so forth, that was the most fundamental thing I think I wanted to communicate, is like, yes, you should ask. You have you have every right to, and you should.
Mm,
And just giving a context to, like, trust yourself, to that, not only that you should, you have the apparatus to do it. You have the ability to, turn inward and start to look and find out what's actually going on. And anyway, yeah.
yeah.
But
No, yeah.
it's so hidden in plain sight, and it's
Mm,
something that I think so many people don't really give themselves permission to do, for various reasons.
yeah. And I think there are so many reasons, aren't there? Your own sort of internal fears and biases, but the people around you might not support it. It's not sort of embedded in
Yeah.
culture or social life, or unless you happen to grow up in a sort of healthy religious family, or something like that.
Yeah. When did you start looking more directly, or more knowingly, perhaps? I'll say it that way.
Yeah. I would say there was quite a bit of a long gap. So sort of late teens, early 20s, I I read quite a lot, sort of, yeah, I guess I sort of, like easy books, like, by Krishnamurti and some Buddhist texts, easy, stuff. Um, and I guess, yeah. Then I did a sort of shiatsu practitioner training sort of in my mid-20s, so that sort of, brought in lots of, avenues as well to sort of investigate. And then started sort of practicing meditation, and then I sort of got involved with a Buddhist movement sort of in my mid-20s, I would say. And that was quite interesting because having been a huge fan of Buddhism in terms of the philosophy and what it was teaching me, I met lots of people that were Buddhist. They were all incredible people, really, really inspiring. However, being part of this sort of organisation, if you like, felt it just wasn't right for me. Again, I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I was learning the mindfulness of breathing, metta bhavana, those sort of practices. And whilst they were helpful, there was just something still that wasn't quite sort of hitting the spot for me. I've been on a few retreats. It's just so hard to describe. And then I think, yeah, I sort of had, so I have two children, and that sort of, in a way, took me away from the sort of Buddhist practice. I wouldn't say spiritual practice, but that bit also actually brought me into it as well. It was sort of a bit of both. And then I guess sort of early 30s, I sort of just abandoned it all, really. I just sort of felt like I haven't really found anything here. And that's when I sort of retrained as a psychologist, and I started becoming a bit more sort of science oriented. And I was thinking, oh, we just don't need religion. We don't need, all the sort of dogma, etc. I could just, go for a walk and get excited by seeing a leaf, and I was thinking, that's more where it's at for me at that time. And a long
Can I
sort
ask
of
a
time,
question about that?
yeah,
So when you were involved in reading Krishnamurti and then leading into, being involved with a Buddhist group and learning more Buddhist doctrine and so forth, did you have the sense that what they were talking about, or what Buddha was talking about, enlightenment and so forth, that was something that could happen to you in this lifetime, and maybe that's the whole point of Buddhism and none of the doctrine? Like, did you have that sense at that point at
no,
all,
no.
or was
No,
it
I
more
mean,
like
enlightenment was,
doctrinal?
yeah, enlightenment had a capital E, and only the Buddha is enlightened, And, I think that was, I don't think people obviously explicitly said that, but that was the message. And I wasn't sure I even wanted to be enlightened. That was the thing. So that's, I think, why I didn't connect with it, because I didn't really understand what enlightenment was. I still wanted to know what was going on. That was my question. I was after truth. And it was wonderful to learn these sort of, the metta bhavana, to learn more about compassion. That was, brilliant. But still, what I was seeking was truth. And there was no one saying this is where you find truth of reality. I know that is in Buddhism, but that wasn't the sort of message that was transmitted. So I was sort of doing all these practices that were being transmitted more as if that's going to make me into a better person. And whilst I did want to be a better person, I wanted to know the truth. That was, the thing. And I sound like the way I describe it now as if I was really clear. I wasn't that clear. I knew that I wanted this, but it wasn't so explicit. And I think that's why I got lost in it. It took me so long to sort of actually work it out. And it was hard to listen to that that intention, that sort of deep intention, because it got lost so much, I guess, if that makes sense.
Totally. It's fascinating. And I ask it knowing, I mean, I kind of felt like I already knew the answer, but just
Yeah,
these interviews are gauged to anyone listening that, you know, it's very common in traditional Buddhist groups and traditions that the people participating in it, they're really doing Buddhism, sure. They're learning practices, they're doing practices, they're learning the doctrine, but there are groups of people where the majority of them, if not all of them in the group, don't even know that you can actually wake up now. Like that's the point. And in my opinion, that's if without that point, forget the rest. Like the rest is rearranging deck chairs on a Titanic, you know? And so I'm not criticizing anything or anyone. I'm
No,
not saying
no,
there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying
I'm
it's the
laughing because
nature of the way what's that?
I'm just laughing because I agree. I sort of think of,
Yeah.
mindfulness, wonderful though it is, it's just sort of tidying up your shit. You know, sorry, no, just,
Yeah.
and
Oh no.
it's
And so
be
it's interesting
mindful.
because yeah, there's just so much. Anyone who thinks we're talking over each other, I'm sorry. There's a bit of lag in our internet connection, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
okay. But yeah, so yeah, it fascinates me the mechanics of ego structures and social dynamics. They're quite tightly knit and quite powerful, and they're very hypnotic. And so the ego can hide so easily in spiritual groups and so forth. It's not a problem, right, for the selfing structures or however you want to describe the forces of delusion, but they're powerful, and that's one example. And that doesn't mean that every Buddhist group that there's not a knowledge of awakening as a true possibility now in a good like Zen group. Hopefully that's intact and some Dzogchen and different things. But to me, that's the point. And if that point isn't clearly and explicitly obvious to you in a group, maybe look around, like because it's available for sure. You know. So anyway, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I really agree. And I think that can be one of the main barriers for people to awakening because they don't believe that they can do it, that it will happen, or that it's available. And if that's actually embedded in the sort of spiritual group that you're part of, then, there's no hope. Well, there might be, but, for sure. I
yeah,
mean, I remember going to some sort of introduction to mindfulness session, meditation session. And at the beginning, we're all sitting on our cushions, and the person leading the meditation started reading from the Heart Sutra, and said, I can't remember, if there's a bit before this, but it said form is emptiness and emptiness is form, and I spontaneously just burst out laughing, and amidst this sort of very calm, peaceful, we're all sat in a circle, and I sort of laughed and then had to sort of turn it into a cough. But I know, like, oh, sorry, because it was this sort of pristine sort of situation, but I'd never heard it before, and it resonated straight away. It made me laugh because I thought, oh my goodness, it's like that. And there was this sense of inevitability and the sort of humorous side of Murphy's Law sort of coming in with it. It was because I just found it sort of funny in a not a ridiculous way, in a sort of knowing way. But it was, nobody did anything to quash it. It was just the environment there. There was no way
yeah.
to follow it up. And I never realised until after sort of my first awakening that that was what had happened. I just thought I was, being a silly, giggly schoolgirl in the class. That's what I was used to doing at school, having a giggle about something silly that the teacher had said. And it wasn't until later, when of course that sort of kept coming up, I was like, oh, I must have got it in some form then. Yeah.
The Heart Sutra is so powerful, so
Yeah.
powerful.
It's incredible. Yeah.
So then, when did things start changing? As far as you said, you became more little scientifically minded. You were trained in psychology, less interested in old doctrine and so forth. What
Yeah.
what happened then?
Well, I think it wasn't that I was less interested. I just had lost my way a bit, really. I think I'd become a bit disillusioned and I'd lost my sort of thread of what I was seeking, I suppose. This sort of, there was nothing to sort of excite me that I felt that I should follow. And just the sort of years went by, really, for a while. And then I bumped into a friend of mine, and she mentioned that her partner, who I knew from previous sort of times being involved with this Buddhist group, had done this sort of self-inquiry practice, and she described it and what had happened to him. And I remember I can't remember what she said or how she described it, but I just remember thinking, that is what I want to do. And I said, I need the email address or the website, whatever, now. And she texted me when she got home, and I logged on straight away. And that
I
was
love
it.
it.
I just knew, and I just looked it up today actually, because it's sort of recorded online, and it was, yeah, it was so quick. I just, it was just like this sort of turnaround. And I think it was, I knew sort of this friend of mine that I really trusted, and what this process that he'd been through, and he used to be an ordained Buddhist and had become disillusioned with everything, and he's like 25 years older than me. I have a huge respect for him, and I just thought, all right, if he's done it, I'm doing it. And that was it.
Truth
So
has a ring to it. Truth is a powerful transmitter, and it comes in strange forms. Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself and get
yeah,
disillusioned. But boy, when you hear that tuning fork, you know, time to tune
yeah,
in.
no, absolutely. And I think that
So you
process sort of took a few days. It was one of those things where you would get a guide, and they would ask you questions, or one question per day, and you'd sort of write back, and you would write from direct experience, and they'd ask you sort of questions around self and observer, sort of usual stuff. But I do remember at the beginning thinking, there was a lot of initially a bit of fear, and can I do this? And but I think, because the good thing for me, I guess, was that because it happened quite quickly, because I wanted it so much, I didn't question too much whether I could do it. I mean, I did, but not in the way that I normally would have done. And I did start reading a bit about it, but then I thought, no, don't read about it, just do it. And I really sort of intuited that it's all got to be in direct experience. Don't think about it. And I'm a huge intellectualizer. I think about everything far too much. I know most of us do, but I sense that no, that's not the way forward. Just go with it, And I had this
you
sense,
remember?
yeah, go on.
I was just going to ask. Do you remember the process for you specifically, like how it played out in your own inquiry?
Yeah, so I think initially, in terms of like taking that leap of faith, it's really hard to put into words. But I had, I guess, evidence that things would be all right on the other side, from other people I knew, from some of this sort of more intellectual psychology and science that I've been studying, more sort of spiritual experience. So the sort of whole breadth. But I had this real sense that I had to trust and let go. And I think maybe I must have somewhere in the past tried to do this as well, because it didn't seem a huge thing. I had this trust. I thought, well, if other people do it, it can't be that bad, because they don't all fall apart afterwards. And then I think I had this trust also that it cannot not be the most natural thing for us all to do. So I was thinking quite logically about it. If it's the most natural thing to do, why would it render us, non-functioning or dysfunctional afterwards? So it was a bit of a leap of faith, for sure. But and I think in terms of like looking at my attachments beforehand, the obvious one was my children. And I think people often think that you have to sort of give everything up, and it's not like I thought, oh, I have to give up my children, because you can't do that. It's not at that sort of level. But it felt more fundamental than having children, which is a big thing for a mum to say, because that could just sound negligent to social services, but it just it's just more fundamental. And I had this trust that it would not affect that. And I don't know why I had that trust, but I just thought, how could it really? And I understand that people do have that. And I did also have those doubts, for sure. It sounds like it was easy, and it wasn't. but I really went through it, both, in my head for sure, but also in sort of direct experience. I thought, how can this not be the right thing to do, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think initially, I was asked these questions that were all getting me to relate to sort of direct experience. And I wasn't even meditating much. Can you still hear me? I think I've frozen.
Yeah. I can hear you.
Frozen, scratching my face.
No, you're okay.
But yeah, that's right. So I was so one of the things I enjoy doing is riding my mountain bike a lot, and I was using quite a lot of these sort of self-inquiry questions when I was actually on my bike. And the sort of biking I do is, it's sort of off-road. It can be quite sort of sketchy through woods and over rocks. Also out in nature. But there was a real sense then of I get it. There is actually, strangely, there's no doer here. What I'm perceiving is, I remember relating these experiences of, trees whizzing past and rocks underneath. And, it was all sort of, there was an absence of self, which is, really contradictory, because obviously if there wasn't a self operating that bike in that moment, then, I'd be toast. So that was quite interesting, that paradox there. But that's one thing that was helping me to sort of see through that sort of whole illusion of self and the doer.
Yeah, when you experience that I'll just call it like the whole environment's just doing what it's doing, and it's not happening like to a central character at all. Just to clarify, anyone who's hearing this, is it a mystical or spacious experience, or is it just simple and natural more?
Yeah, definitely simple and natural, because there was nothing mystical about it. Sorry, what was the other thing you said?
That was it. I just wanted to clarify, because someone might think, well, you're riding a bike and wasn't that dangerous? And it's
Yeah,
not, though. You realize what's actually happening.
yeah,
The overlay is that, oh, I'm on a bike and I'm controlling this and I'm seeing that, and the monitoring mind that thinks it's in control of everything. When that goes quiet, the functioning's fine. The functioning, in fact, it's better in a sense, because there's more clarity and more perceptual distance is not really there, and there's no second guessing anything, and you realize how simple everything can be and actually is.
yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, that sort of often, people talk about flow states, don't they? And especially, sports people, or, in all sorts of contexts. And that's, I guess, one a way of sort of describing that. But I think it was a nice one for me, because you can feel very safe, meditating or sitting in a chair. But, this was happening when I was, on a potentially dangerous, situation. And I was in, like you say, full control, if not more control. So that it was really nice to get that early on. It sort of proved certain things to me, which is, what I wanted.
Mm. And this had been just a couple of days of inquiry?
So it was, I think, about 4 days. And it was 4 or 5 questions, like one question a day. And then, I was still going about my day to day experience, but I was using these questions in my day to day life. And I think, again, this is what appealed to me so much more about that, compared to when I was involved with a sort of Buddhist group, was that I wanted, whatever it is that we find, whatever we're looking for, enlightenment or awakening, for me, it always had to be able to translate into the everyday life. I always. And I remember when I first joined this Buddhist group, especially because I had young children, there was a sort of quite a focus on, retreat and getting away, leaving your children, leaving your family, going and sitting on top of a mountain or in a cave somewhere. And I remember at that point thinking, no, that's just not right. Awakening, enlightenment, or whatever it is that we're seeking should be here right now in every moment. And, I did feel that strongly, but I didn't know that. I just assumed that or thought it.
Yeah.
I forgot where I'm going with this now.
I think that's really, I think it's a very important point to make. And um, I'm a fan of retreat practice. I recommend it to people. Um, but I will tell you, it's easy to compartmentalize your life such that, well, the sitting is that's when I meditate and that's when I feel peaceful. But then I go about regular life and it's the normal day-to-day stress of regular life. And the mind can start to structure itself around that and be comfortable in that, not realizing that like what you're really going to wake up to, let's say, or the insight is not situational at all. It doesn't have to do with deep samadhi. It's there
Mm,
in deep samadhi, and it's there when you're walking across the floor, and it's there when you're having a conversation. It's that fundamental of a shift. And so the reason I say this is there are people who are just too busy. I don't know about busy, but they have so many responsibilities that they can't get to retreats. They may not even have that much time to meditate during the day. They have children, maybe single parents. Those are challenging situations, but people wake up in those situations as well. I see it
yeah,
for sure. So down and dirty life is a very, very good testing ground. And there's something beautiful about inquiry in that as well, is you can just carry it through the day and see how it applies to every situation when you start to find that one taste, that sameness, that direct experience that, wow, it has all these flavors and yet it's only one flavor. It's just never moving. It's always here. And anyway, somehow that can just flip things over for you, you know? So there's no set of circumstances that someone cannot wake up in. I'll say it that way. Like life really offers all the texture anyone needs to wake up.
yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. And yeah, whilst I mean, I have been on retreats, and they are, the more recent ones I've been on have been really, really helpful and wonderful. But yeah, I think the reality for me in the early years was, yeah, I did have two children at home, and I was on my own, and two jobs, and was studying as well at the same time. Yeah, so you just got to find those moments, or find those moments in normal life for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened after the moment with the bike and riding and so forth?
Yeah, so I think I um must have been some other question. I must have been, just sort of writing in direct experience or something. But I remember I was sitting actually where I'm sitting now at my desk, and I just looked away from the screen and looked outside into my garden, and there it was. It just was like a sort of like bang, gone. How can I describe it? It was just this sudden realization that there's sort of there are no things, that it's all one. And actually, I remember I said the F word because I couldn't believe it. It was like, wow. And as I saw it, like we were talking earlier, I'd seen it before as a child, but I didn't know what it was. And it's not that spectacular. It just is what it is. So it's not spectacular. It wasn't spectacular enough, I guess, as a child for me to think, oh, this is interesting, because it's just how things are.
Mm-hmm.
I remember trying to sort of, so this was like 8.5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I think my first sort of realization was that, yeah, there are no things, there's nothing. And that word nothing, suddenly I got it in terms of no thing. And that that sort of, there's no sort of separation. And I was looking into my garden, and I could see, it's no great view or anything. It wasn't like big mountains or seascape. It's just a hedge and a garden table and a little bit of grass and, patio. And I was looking at these things thinking they're not their own things. There is no hedge or grass or table or patio. And I'm still seeing them as exactly as they are. When people say everything dissolves into one, my visual field is exactly the same, for me then. And then I had this strange sort of imagining of this little bunny rabbit hopping into the garden. There wasn't a bunny rabbit, but I imagined this bunny rabbit. And I was thinking, what would this little baby bunny see if he came into my garden? He wouldn't be like, oh, there's the hedge and that's Sophie's patio and there's her bike. And, you know, they would just see what they see. And that was what I was sort of seeing. And it sort of confirmed what I was seeing, if that makes sense. And then I just went through this sort of logical progression of events, which sounds quite intellectual, but it wasn't. It was very sort of direct. So I was like, if there are no things, then, you know, there's no me. So wham, the sort of self went. So I'm just like the hedge that isn't a hedge, and like the grass that isn't a grass. And then it sort of progressed to, well, if there are no things, then this must be everything. This is everything we could possibly imagine, including me, and therefore I must be everything. And then that's a bit weird because, of course, that sounds all really arrogant and conceited, but it didn't feel like that at the time because there was just this sort of non-separation. And then I can't remember which sort of order this was in, but I think then I thought, well, if there's no things, no separation, no concepts, etc., then that must extend to time and space. So I then sort of looked at that and I was like, oh my God, there's no time. And, you know, realised that, and that must mean there's no space. And I was looking at sort of relative space, and it was just like, wow. This sort of kept going on. And then I just couldn't believe it, really. It was so ordinary, so clear. And sort of, you know, a few minutes later, just this huge sense of relief, just like, oh my God, nothing to do. There it is. And I had this sense that I'd seen it before. How have I missed it? You know, all of that, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
the
think what,
relief is so it's such a, I mean, it's grace.
yeah,
And yeah.
yeah, I think that it was all, at the time, it was quite sort of heady, if you like. And then it wasn't until it's maybe a few days later, the sort of grace and the gratitude were just like, wow, I can't, but I felt like I'd been sort of blessed with this knowledge or this seeing or, you know, whatever. And again, not in any sort of special way. I just felt really lucky that I'd sort of almost stumbled across it, if you like. Even though at the same time it was paradoxical because there'd been this search all along, relentless search. But yeah, it was, but then that sort of settled more sort of further down and was more heart opening. And then, you know, then that sort of triggered a whole new set of experiences or non-experiences, whatever you want to call it.
It gets hard to talk about for sure.
Yeah, it does really. And I suppose, I mean, I guess I had, you know, people talk about this honeymoon period. That was probably on and off with me. I know you know, can't have a honeymoon period that's on and off, but it was on and off for sort of several years in a way. You know, it was incredible. And I think and that was much more sort of heart-centered, heart-related, and, you know, everything I just found incredibly moving and wonderful all the time. But then actually 2 months, now I remember, 2 months after that initial awakening, I had a sort of cancer scare. I found a lump on my breast and I went to the doctors and they said, oh, okay, we need to get this investigated. We'll book you in for sort of 2 weeks time to have this looked at properly. And I remember coming back from this appointment and my head didn't sort of go to, oh, you know, this is a bit scary, but let's wait and see what happens. It went straight to, I'm going to die and I'd be lucky if I've got 2 years to live. Now, no one had told me this. This is just where I went with it. And I remember coming back, I think my kids must have been at school. I came back and I just felt so sort of horror struck and terror stricken, if you like, that, yeah, I thought, wow, I'm going to die. And that feeling of really, really feeling it, I was really feeling I'm going to die. There's going to be no me anymore. Was just, it was the literal gut wrenching. And I remember just being sort of folded up, just crying and crying on my sort of bedroom floor. Just didn't know what to do with myself. It felt so terrible. And obviously I was thinking about my children, my head was doing all sorts with all of this. But then after maybe, I don't know, a couple of hours, it felt like, but I'm not really sure. I had this sort of sense of, I wouldn't say peace, but this sense that if this is what's going to happen, and, nobody knows, it was all fine, by the way. But at this point, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I had this really deep sense after a while that if this does happen, if I'm, terminally ill and I have to deal with this, at some level, this is actually going to be okay. And I really don't mean that in a glib way, in a, superficial way. It really, like, there was this deep sort of stirring of, this could be okay. You're going to be all right with this. And I don't mean, you're going to be okay in a superficial way. It was like a very sort of deep felt sense of it's going to be okay. And I even was thinking my children are going to be okay. And again, for a mum to sort of think that sounds a bit crazy, but later on, that was actually very good for how I feel about my children. I sort of have a lot of confidence in them and how they are, which I think is a good way to be rather than worrying about them all the time. But yeah, sort of back to just this sense of okayness. I just remember thinking, wow, it probably will be okay, And I really did feel like I, at some level, met death, or something died in me during that process. As I sort of went as deep as I think I can go. And it wasn't intentional. I just basically panicked after a doctor's appointment.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, I didn't even go on the internet, but I still felt this, deep, like terror, I think it was. But I do think, that was sort of pivotal in part of this sort of awakening process, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's quite common that we have an awakening, we have a shift in identity, and it's very much in the mind space, in the cognitive identity that just gets blown out, and uh, it affords us so much relief, and often for a good amount of time. But at some point, the the attachment to, or the fear of losing the attachment to the body, to the physicality actually of being alive in any way at all, we will come in contact with that. And that's after awakening, when you experience emotions, you experience them so much more directly. You are the emotion. The emotion is absolute terror or fear or dread or whatever. But the beauty of that, first of all, that we actually can experience it instead of suppressing it or acting unconsciously on it and so forth. But also, it tends to pass quicker. It's not a blanket of depression that lasts years. It's an extremely intense and completely engulfing experience that might last a few hours or less. And that, for anyone who is hearing this and saying, after awakening and all the equanimity and bliss and whatever, however you might define that, but just the clarity and the big relief that comes. Well, what's this about all this intense emotion that comes later? It's just how this goes. You have to come in contact with everything. And there are deeper identity structures that have to do with identity with the body and with form. And then there's even identity with formlessness, which is far more subtle. But those, you're going to come in contact with them in this process. The process will continue to play out. And, it sounds to me like you were courageous and vulnerable and just went with it and felt it. And that's the best thing you can do, really. Resisting it is not a great idea because you'll be resisting a very, very, very powerful force.
Yeah.
And yeah, so now
Yeah.
after that relief or that release of the fear around death, has that returned at all, or is that sort of the way it is now for you?
It comes and goes, I think, because I'm not, day to day, I'm not hugely in touch with it, but I check in with it sometimes to see, is there fear around death still? And sometimes there is a bit, and then I sort of sit with it a bit more, and then it goes. And actually, I didn't sort of say, earlier on, as a sort of, I guess somewhere, as a child or a teenager, or maybe initially sort of coming into contact with Buddhism, one thing that I really felt I wanted to have was this sort of okayness with death. So apart from sort of really wanting to understand the truth, there was this real desire to feel okay about death and dying. Other cultures seem to be a lot more sort of proficient at it. It doesn't mean it's not sort of sad, difficult, terrible, but I just wanted to feel okay with it. So for me, it was a huge relief to, it was a really unpleasant experience at the time. But even at the time, when I was really suffering with it, it felt so real. And I didn't have my head, well, I did in a way have my head telling me all these sort of unrealistic things that I didn't know was going to happen. But the feeling of the emotion was so raw and real that I didn't really want to be experiencing anything else. I couldn't be. And that was just how it was. And I think what you just said before about, these sort of powerful emotions, and yes, I really do experience that, but it's not a bad thing. So, recently I've been sort of experiencing a lot of grief because my youngest, my son, has just gone to university. And I thought I'd be fine with this. I'm quite independent. I was used to my children visiting their father sort of, every other weekend and during the week. And so I'm used to that separation. But yeah, no, this was massive. And I didn't feel it with my daughter when she went, I think because maybe Harry was still at home, so there was still one. But I just felt this huge grief about, it being an end of an era. And it was really powerful and strong. But all the time I felt like, no, I need to just go through this. This is just what I'm feeling. I need to let it come up. And I sort of find also with when emotions do come up, they can feel disproportionately powerful to what the situation is. There's something sort of quite small might happen, and I might feel quite emotional. But the way I used to make sense of it, it doesn't happen so much now, but more a few years ago, was that it felt to me that post-awakening I had these other repressed emotions that were sort of jumping on, like piggybacking onto these ones that were ready to come up, and there was like loads more coming through. So I just had to sort of sit there and deal with it, really, allow them. And I guess from, grieving a lot as a child, I'm quite sort of at friends and I'm okay with grief. It's a sort of expression that I'm sort of fairly comfortable with. But I sometimes think, God, is it ever going to end? But no, it just keeps coming back. But it's okay. It doesn't feel so awful anymore. It's more just the emotions, the actions. I'll feel tearful and they'll be crying, but there'll be beauty there too. There is beauty there, which I hadn't really noticed before.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to me that we come to this place. What you're voicing is equanimity in relation to emotion, that it's there, it's intense, it's powerful. Perhaps in the past it would have been problematic. I would have repressed it, but regardless of all of that, it's just what's happening. It is here, and it's a life force, and it's fine. And what I find is that the more the subtle resistance patterns drop away naturally, the more emotion feels to me like it feels like the whole environment. It's the energy of the environment. Like even seasons have a sort of emotion. Like we're in autumn now, and it's so beautiful because there is a lot of grief. There's a lot of letting go, a lot of things moving into dormancy, completely natural processes. How wonderful that we can feel these natural, energetic, integrated experiences with everything around us. We couldn't be here if there wasn't a grief for the loss of a loved one. That allows, talking scientifically at least, allows the species to propagate and so forth. So to me, it's a privilege to feel these things, feel them with myself and feel them with anyone else who has to feel and go through them. And it leads us to this place of just a gentleness and acceptance and authenticity.
Yeah. Wow, that's really lovely, and I really sense that. I think, with the seasons, they're almost there to allow you. They're sort of welcoming you into these different emotions and ways of being if you sort of feel into it. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah,
And the seasons of life as well, that the season of life
yeah,
when it's time to let your child, go really take the leap of independence and leave
yeah.
your physical, living situation. And yeah.
Yeah, and actually, Angela, I think in one of your videos you did say something recently because I think I was watching it and I was just crying at the time because I think like up until a few days ago, I've sort of cried every day since he's gone. But again, it hasn't been bad. It's just me crying. But I was watching one video and I think you said something like, when you express the emotion, it releases, it happens at the same time. And that really stuck with me because it was just, I had some people around me saying, oh, it will be all right and he'll be back in a few weeks. And, everyone sort of trying to make it all right. And it was like, no, it's the end of an era and it's okay, but I want to sort of feel this.
Mhm.
Yeah. But yeah, but
Yeah.
also that sort of, like you said, I feel it's important to sort of let these emotions do their thing, and not be too scared of them. Just let them do their thing. And then, yeah, well, you just sort of have to, really. I mean, I know people don't, but
Mhm.
some people don't, but you
Yeah.
do sort of have to. And then what happens later, they're sort of, they're cleansing in a sense, aren't they? I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And as that experience of non-dual, meaning non-separation and the physicality of this, the empty physicality, uh, it really teaches you what the energy of everything changing forms is. Teaches you directly, energetically. The way the human body mind might interpret that is grief or loss, but the
Yeah,
truth of it is everything's changing forms all the time, and we're participating in it. The whole
yeah,
environment's participating in it as itself. It's so beautiful. Yeah,
mm, yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Death, and birth are perspectives. The death of something is the birth of something else, um, and the energy systems are all completely integrated with all of that. It works
Yeah,
so perfectly. Yeah.
I know. And when you think, almost death and birth are the same thing, at that level of, then
Yeah.
yeah, that blows my mind.
Hmm. The ninth oxhorting picture describes it so well. Um, I observe the forms of integration and disintegration, and I am ever blissful. And that those forms are this, all of this: integration, disintegration, no thingness, and everythingness, in perfect balance and perfect harmony. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I love those ox-herding pictures. I hadn't come across them until I read your book. But what you just described, you know, I, it's really hard, but I think you you can only apply that to, everything that's going on in the world. But you have to be so careful. But that to me is it.
Hmm.
The most intense suffering, the most awful things that are going on. And I don't want to sort of say that too. I'm really not saying it casually at all. But yeah, that ninth picture is it really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't want to say too
Um,
much because I think you know what I'm saying, but yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, in this kind of equanimity described in that picture, it's not an equanimity of that has anything to do with distancing or numbness or rationalizing. It's nothing like that at all.
No.
You feel simultaneously the suffering of the world, and you feel where
Mm,
no suffering ever exists and never
yeah.
could. At, and the heart is wide open. It has to be. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
I think that's the thing is that sort of suffering and non-suffering just dissolve into one another, and it doesn't
Mhm.
even become there's no concept of it at all anymore. In
Yeah.
that sense, for my
The Heart
experience.
Sutra points to that so beautifully as well.
Mm.
It's no suffering, no end of it.
Yeah. It just always makes me laugh. The heart suit. Well, from that very first time of sitting in that meditation class, and I just do read it, and it's beautiful. And then sometimes it also just makes me laugh because of the sort
Hmm.
of deep.
It makes me giddy as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how at this point, is this something that you live it and so forth, but don't necessarily talk about it, or do you are you in any groups where you discuss this or talk to people who are
No,
going through this process at all?
yeah, that's a really interesting question, actually. So, ever since that first awakening, my gut reaction with this was to not join groups, not discuss it, just do this on your own. And it felt so delicate, if you like, that I just didn't want to taint it or allow, like, it would be me that would taint it, but me getting drawn into something, my ego, that would change it and make it into something else. And I remember sort of, I don't know, it was early days. I remember saying to myself, no, I'm not gonna, there are loads of groups around me I could have joined. And I just thought, no, I'm just not going to. And I think it was a bit the experience I'd had with the Buddhist group before, and it wasn't anyone in particular. It was more me. But I just thought, no, I don't want to meet people that I think are more awakened than me or less awakened than me, and then start thinking about like all the things the mind can do. It wasn't that question particularly, but trying to navigate group norms and all that. I just didn't want any of it, and I think maybe that's why it's just taken me so long for it to integrate, because I've just been on my own with it, really. I have the one friend that did this process before me that I do see, periodically, and we sort of check in with each other. But other than that, there's really no one else that I talk to about this. And I think it's okay. I don't really know any other way. I did go on a retreat after, you think how long it would have been, 3 or 4 years later, and the person that was leading that retreat said to me, you shouldn't do this on your own. It's about sangha, and I was like, but still, I just been doing it on my own. Yeah, and I've been to a couple of retreats and online retreats, the odd event, but really, no, I would say I'm on my own with it. And I don't know if that's the right way or not. It's just that's what's happening. That's what I'm
Yeah,
doing. And maybe
feels
is
right
it,
to me.
sorry?
I was just say it feels right to me.
Yeah. Maybe as it deepens and I might feel less swayed by experiences, I might reach out, because it's sort of so great talking to you today. I don't have these conversations very often. But I think also what happened after, say, 3 or 4 years, was that then it really did start to fade a lot. It was almost like this sort of, there was always this okayness if I checked in, but it was just more like this, the size of a pinhead in my whole experience. And I think I'd read somewhere at some point that, the awakening process, you get to a certain point and then you sort of walk back into life. There's something like that, I don't know. And I think I misread that or misinterpreted that too early, where I thought, yeah, I'm just going to walk back into life and carry on as usual with this, whole sort of awakening behind me, or with me. But then it just sort of, it did just fade, and I knew it was still there, but I wasn't getting any of the sort of wonderful experiences that I used to have. And then the seeker came back with a vengeance. Probably for years, until literally the other day when I WhatsApped you and was reading page 206. So it's been a long time I've been in this sort of nightmare of a situation of like, sort of at a deep level everything feels okay, but actually day-to-day life isn't sort of so wondrous as it was in those honeymoon years. And what's wrong? What do I need to do? How can I make this better? And wanting to change it all.
Yeah, yeah. You're your whole path with the part we're talking about is very interesting to me. It's because I can relate to so much of it. I definitely relate to, for me, after awakening, there were people, a few people around me who I was like transmitting it to just by the way I wasn't trying to, and it was obvious though. And but then something in me, and it was energetic. It was just like it was kind of like it's not time for that. Not that I ever thought there would be time. I just could feel it. It's like no, this isn't something I feel comfortable talking about or sharing because there are trappings. Also because I had such a reverence for the process, and because it had nothing to do with me. It still has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with anyone, and it's a natural process that either will play out or won't. And in the absolute aspect, that's the case. In the relative aspect, well, it's just a matter of conditioning. Or conditions. If the conditions arise such that you start talking about it, you will. If they don't, you won't, and that's how it is. What's interesting is to a traditional Dharma person, that might sound like you made a mistake or you abandoned the path or something. That's not true. I think when people have a very deep awakening in the way you did, the awakening teaches itself. It informs itself. It's a natural process, and it will continue to play out. And you know that. I assume you know that. It seems like you would probably endorse that. But for me, that's how it was for many years. I literally didn't talk about even the fact that I had a shift of any kind. I didn't even know it in a way. Like I knew it, but I didn't reference it. I didn't reference it. There's nothing to reference it. There's nothing here that needs to reference an experience that it's having. So for years, I didn't talk about this subject at all. And the way it started happening, as far as me talking to people, was interesting. It would come up very, very casually. And it didn't even feel like I was talking about spirituality, Buddhism, or non-duality. It would be in some conversation, and then someone would say, "Whoa, what you just said, like, that had a profound effect on me. Can you write that down?" Or something like that. And I was like, I guess if you want me to, and I didn't even make the connection that, oh, this is about that, right? It was almost like the whole thing came to an end for me, and there was nothing I could say or do about it. And it's obvious that there is no underlying form to anything. There's no self in any one. All that is clear as a bell to me, to no one. But it doesn't mean that I have to talk about it or transmit it or anything like that, right? So anyway, I'm talking a lot about myself, but I'm reflecting on what you just said, and I completely understand that. And then the
Do
funny thing
you
is
feel?
like go ahead.
Sorry, carry on.
Well, I was going to say, as you said, even the thoughts came back, and the seeker about like seeking in a spiritual way comes back. But the funny thing is, you know, I assume your sense is that's only really in the relative. It's the relative part of things that can actually start to resonate with spiritual seekers again, in a way, right? With someone who's going through this, and to me, that's a movement of compassion. Um, it's like when you come back around, you're not doing it for yourself this time. It's for others, whether you know it or not. And how that plays out is very different depending on the person it's playing out in. And there still can be some material to come and readdress as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure. No, that does make sense. But I think, yeah, this sort of, yeah. I was going to ask you though, Angela, just quickly when you were having these conversations, and just prior to that, did it feel, were you walking around having this sort of sense of, oneness or whatever, all the time?
I don't have
Did it
any sense
feel?
of anything all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a silly. But even then, it wasn't like it never felt to you like it went away, because it's a really common thing, isn't it? Lots of people think, oh, I got it and then it's gone. But you didn't go
This,
through that.
the sense of a sort of universal oneness will go away. As
Mm,
realization deepens, it will go away
Oh,
because
okay.
there's a subtle sense of a universal self in it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's my experience based on
Yeah.
our conversations as well. That's what I think. There's different. There's a oneness that is I might call it the oneness of unbound consciousness or something like that. Any way you could possibly experience yourself or objects or subject object, all of that is structured in consciousness in very subtle ways. At some
Mm,
point, um, the identity, it's almost like the apparatus that makes identity possible at all. You can still
mm,
identify with that. And
yeah.
when you stop identifying with that, things take very strange turns. It becomes
Mm,
even more ordinary. and things are very momentary. So whatever's happening now is like its own completely its own reality, and it'll completely die away. It is dying away right now, and then the next reality comes, and the next reality, and it gets very hard to reference back to someone having an experience and going, oh, what happened to the person who was experiencing oneness? Why am I not experiencing oneness? Or even compassion. I used to feel such intense compassion. Like I felt my heart was
Mm.
expanded to the size of the entire world and I felt everyone's pain. That even went
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I
Okay.
don't feel compassion, but it's very situational.
That's really interesting. And I do have this sense that, like, years ago, of just, when you sort of refresh your computer screen and the sort of little thing goes round, and then you get a new picture, then you refresh again and you get another one. That was like, I remember having that sense of what it was like for a bit. That it's
Mhm.
sort of, you've got to find it in each moment. But even though there aren't moments, but each sort of instance, you've got to keep basically pressing the refresh button,
Yeah.
and not get stuck, if you know what I mean. Like you said, it's always changing.
Yes, exactly. And transient nature is a very difficult thing to talk about in the way it's experienced in deep realization, but I'll try to make an analogy to what we're talking about. And that is there's a certain kind of transient nature you realize that things are formless, things come and go all the time, nothing is abiding and so forth. There's a consciousness version of that where you and you have that after first awakening for sure, where you're like, oh yeah, I see the formlessness of everything and it's so beautiful and wonderful. But it's easy to overlook that there's something there experiencing that formlessness, and that's the oneness in a way. That's one way of saying it. When that starts to go away, it's so strange because you have no bearings at all. There's nothing collating experience anymore. There's nothing gluing experience together anymore. And one thought, one perception in one moment can feel like totally real to you, right? Not to you, but it just
Mm.
feels real because that's what's happening, one single thought. And then that can be completely gone. And then the moment is empty of any abiding nature of any sort or any form and that's very real. But even that, like there's nothing going, oh, I moved from this experience to that experience anymore. That thing that seems to that substance, that continuity that seems to sew experience together into some kind of whole goes away. And it can be a very strange time as that becomes more as you become more and more comfortable with that.
Mm.
It's
It
and the
sounds that
grief I think is a marker of that.
that's interesting. It sounds though that maybe paradoxically things start to become disconnected from what you, not from you, but from one
Yeah,
another. And that obviously there's
yeah,
no equation, but everything around you isn't sort of so bound together in the way that we bind things together. It's that they're just all these individual sort of happenings.
yes, yeah. A friend of mine describes it as bubble like and disjoint,
Oh.
unsupported. All experience, all phenomenon, colors, sounds, sensations, feelings, emotions, thoughts. They're bubble-like in the sense that they
Mm.
come into even to say they come into being doesn't make sense because there's nothing monitoring that.
Yeah,
There's no scale of being on which that comes and goes. But it
yeah.
comes into being as its own whatever, and it disappears just as quickly, replaced by something else. They're disjoint in the sense that there's nothing moving from moment to moment anymore. It's
Yeah.
like bubbles of reality coming into being out of nothingness. And each one is completely whole in and of itself, has no relation to anything else.
Mm.
These things are very hard to talk about, but I might say something like Dogen's quote, "When one side is illuminated, the other side is dark." Kind of feels
Mm.
like that. That's what I think he's pointing to.
No, I've had a couple of I don't know, things that I've seen which sort of I think suggest that to me. And like one of the sort of visual images has been a bit like a sort of, I don't know, just like this sort of scape, this sort of landscape of brown blocks all moving up and down at different sort of speeds and at different levels. And that's it. It's
And
almost a
there's no
little bit,
observer.
there's no, yeah, there's nothing. It's just that I would be one of those blocks, to put it crudely, but there's no, and like you said, nothing binding it all together, which, yeah, I have had, definitely have sent. I don't have that in my day to day experience. I can sort of tune into it, but I don't, go
Yeah.
about my day to day experience experiencing that. But I think I know what you mean. I think I've had sort of
Yeah.
glimmers of.
And Totally. And one of those blocks can, as you said, like I might be one of those blocks. So one of those blocks may be the conditions that feels like a self in the moment or of the momentary experience. And the way the way the self would perceive it, if there was one, would be that the next block is consistent and it's the same as the first block in some way, although it's different in another way. That's not how it is. It's
No,
completely coming out of nothing as well. So the
yeah,
continuity of self and time is gone.
yeah, yeah.
It was never there.
I know. Yeah, no, that's crazy. But sure, I totally get that. And that's the thing with these moving up, up and down blocks, that it's not like they're all things either. They could be concepts, experiences, happenings, time related, not, they're just, it's everything. But they're all sort of, I can't think of a word, like instances of something that,
Yeah.
comes and goes.
Environments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Self-experiencing environments that come out of nowhere, go into nowhere, are complete and whole in and of themselves, but have no substance at all. They're not. There's
Yeah.
nothing they relate to. There's no substance in which relationality is even possible anymore. So
Yeah.
there's no perception. The Heart Sutra is like all about this. If you just keep going through
Yeah.
it, you'll see it's all in there.
Yeah.
And it's a strange place that you end up after experiencing wholeness and oneness and all of that. In a sense, there's a different kind of wholeness, but I might call it the wholeness of emptiness, or
That's brilliant. The wholeness of emptiness.
yeah,
I
it's a
love
different
that.
thing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's really reassuring, because I wasn't aware of that. I've been just, until a few days ago, been thinking, where's all the oneness and fantasticness gone? And I've been thinking that for years, and then I sort of realised a few days ago that, it's because, the seekers come back and there can't possibly be a seeker. So that was a huge relief. But yeah, this is really this is like really validating. This is really good.
Yeah, and so the only orientation I would offer at that point is really getting more and more acutely interested in the nature of phenomena, meaning the colors and forms in front of your face right now. Where is that? It's not in time, it's not in space, and yet it's there, it's here, it's somewhere, it's everywhere, it's nowhere. And the sound and the sensation. And so that's that disjoint nature. It's like whatever comes next excludes everything that ever came before. There was no before. Time and space come into being with each of these bubbles of environmental self-expressing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, I get that.
I know,
sure.
right?
Yeah. Definitely. No, I've had periods of time with this, yeah, for sure. But I didn't know it was something to actually really follow, and yeah, that's really interesting.
And then the senses are your beloved. That's it. I mean, because when you see that all of the rest is a dream, right? Awareness and awakening, being asleep, being awake, and processes and self and no self and all that essentially is conceptual. What's real is this. Real and unreal. It doesn't even have to be called real. There's only what's right in front of your face, or what's in the sensation in the hand. There's nothing else. Never has been anything else. There never needs to be anything else.
Yeah.
And it's gone, just like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, and it's such a relief, isn't it? Because I just think this is it. This is it. This is it. This is it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We made. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very hard thing to talk about, but when I'm talking with someone who's experiencing it, it's obvious. So I don't know if you read the part of my book. Somewhere in the book, I described going down a hallway and the lights.
Oh,
it's
like the light coming on and going.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So if you're walking down a hallway and the lights only turn on in the section you're in, it would almost look like lights or a movement of lights down the hallway. Now let's assume you're not even there. There's no one seeing that light. It's just light, right? And it's just appearing, and that makes there appear to be movement, temporality, propagation. None of that's real. Those are all extrapolations in the mind.
Yeah. And I guess, this is that whole sort of questioning of there's no cause, is there? There's nothing causing one another. And I remember encountering this a while ago initially, and yeah, it's mind blowing, isn't it?
Mm.
But, look at, think, I think, oh, I feel like I'm going to have a cup of tea, so I get up and make myself a cup of tea, and you think that's validation for sort of cause and effect, and suddenly it isn't.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the Iowa gambling experiment?
Yes, where have I heard that from? Oh, is that about? I should know this being psychology, like decision making, and when decisions are
Yeah.
recorded unconsciously
Yeah.
before people actually think
Yeah.
they've actually made the
So like,
decision, something like that.
yeah, I think they structure it in different ways, but essentially it's like you put a volunteer down in front of two decks of cards. There's a red deck and a blue deck, and they don't know anything other than once you're done going through one deck of cards, you get to keep the amount of money that was calculated. And the cards will say like minus $10 or 10 pounds or, plus five, minus 20. And it's a running total. And at the end, you get to keep the money. And they can pick whichever deck they want. And they don't know anything else. But they stack it such that like the blue deck will have, it's a bit better deck. Like the blue deck has a little more plus than minus. And the red deck has a little more minus than plus, and they monitor the person just turning over cards, right, one by one. And something like 40 cards in, they consciously say, "Oh, I'm going to turn the blue deck over more because it's a better deck." But like 32 cards in, they're already actually picking the blue deck preferentially. So their body, their behaviors actually changed before they're consciously aware of it. But what's
Yeah.
really fascinating is like 15 cards in, they already having physiologic responses to the red deck. So their body,
Mm-hmm.
like pupil dilation, and I don't know what else they measure heart rate. So your body's already having a stress response to the red deck. So your physical body knows very, very early. Let's call it your energetic body. It knows very early that one deck is different. But your behavior doesn't change till later. And then the last thing is your ego running in going, I did that. You know,
Yeah,
um, it
absolutely.
shows you how automatic so many things are, and
Yeah,
and in my opinion, it gives us permission to free up our attention to just noticing the depth and profundity and non-dual nature of all phenomena, of all of the sense gates.
yeah,
Um,
no, definitely. And I think often we ignore these automatic processes in our body because we think, especially I think people tend to want to favour what's innate, what we feel we're born with. But even you can still have automatic responses that you've learnt, like driving a car, for example. But we tend to sort of ignore them as if they're not something that interesting or wonderful, or that they won't tell us that much about, human experience. And they do, like you just sort of explained with that the Iowa gambling task. It's such a good example, and there's quite a few similar things to that. I mean, I'm really out of touch with this sort of side of psychology, but there's lots of fMRI stuff now which shows that we make decisions way ahead of when we're actually conscious of them. Which is pretty much what that shows as well. And I don't know what then sort of it's not that I struggle with, but I find curious is that so many people encounter this science, yet then don't take it one step further and think, well, hold on a second, why is that happening? And then, so many sort of, seemingly, intelligent, well educated, people, so much
mhm.
sort of science at the moment pointing towards and lining up and with the awakening process and quantum physics as well, all of that, but still seems to be pretty slow, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you really digest that, it's like, can you really blame anyone for anything? Can you, regret and resentment, these things just go down the drain,
Yeah,
when you really digest it. And
definitely.
also it opens your heart and
Yeah,
you have so much more understanding that
yeah,
people have gone through very, very, very traumatic and challenging childhoods and so forth. How could I ever say that I wouldn't have done exactly what they did, you know?
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I remember thinking or experiencing, when I was sort of much more in that sort of open heart phase of just every time I saw someone smile, I just thought, oh, there's enlightenment, there's awakening, no matter who they were. If it was, down the shops or someone on telly that, you don't even like, but you just see them smile, and that would just capture something. And of course, it doesn't have to be smiles, it's every action, it's everything that happens. But that was sort of in the early days, it was a nice sort of way in to sort of recognize that it's just everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So before we wrap up, I want to ask, what would be your advice to anyone who's maybe watching this, who resonates with what we're talking about, with what you went through, but maybe hasn't gone through it yet, or just they deeply resonate with what you said about orienting toward truth, finding the truth. What might you tell somebody like that?
Is this sort of prior to that sort of first awakening, you mean?
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
someone who's listened to this whole conversation and said, whatever that is they're talking about, that whatever she went through, like I want to go through that in the way that she described. As soon as you heard about this group and your friend, you said, that's what I want. There are going to be people watching this who are going to feel exactly like that. And so I just was kind of...
Yeah, sure. Just do it. Just don't hold back, and don't let your mind get in the way of telling you that you can't do it for whatever reason, or now's not the right time. Just follow it. Just go for it. It just sounds so naff, but it's just the way. I remember speaking to some people that I would sort of, in the early days, I'd explain what had happened, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I might do that at some point. Yeah, I might look into that." And it was like, no. You don't understand. You have to do it now, or don't. Of course they can do what they want, but it was just, I was very excited to start with. But if you were thinking, yeah, I want that, then you're there almost. If you know that you want it, then you have to trust that you're there and key into that, like, I want this, and tune into that intention. Don't tune into all the other rubbish about confidence, or you can't do it, or now's not the right time. Because we all have this drive somewhere, I think. We're all sort of due to wake up. It's just some people will, some people won't. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. It's just that sort of trust. And it sounds so cheesy though when I say that. Wish I could
It sounds right on the money though. It is a leap of faith.
If you really want it, you will. I think just got to keep like tuning in with that desire. If you really want it, it will happen. It can't not, really. And almost sort of it's a bit paradoxical. You sort of have to really go after it, but at the same time relax with it, perhaps, because you can try too hard, get too rigid with it. Not take it too seriously, because it's the whole process can be quite fun and light as well as deep and painful. It's everything, Yeah, that's maybe not helpful, because that all sounds really complicated now.
I think it comes across. It's just the way this stuff is. The words can sound contradictory to the logical mind, and then we're gonna have people here are gonna put comments on saying that worked for me. So, and I want to highlight one thing that you said. I think pretty overtly, if not somewhat subtextual, but that is, when we're talking about this going for it, and just really give yourself permission to do it, and let go, a huge part of that I see as a barrier for some people. Well, I think everyone to some degree, but for some people, they really overlook this. And that is, you have to see that the doubt about it is a thought. It's just a thought.
Yes.
Like the thing that says, I can't do that, or I'll do it later, or it'll never work for me, or, oh, I don't know if I have the right technique. It's all fine, but it's all thought. That has nothing to do with the letting go.
Yeah, I think I really agree. And I think that's actually something that I did do quite early on. And you talk about it in one of your videos, I think, about having this really relentless checking in of that's a thought, that's a thought, that's a thought, that's a feeling, that's a thought, that's an emotion, and just maybe like, maybe practice that for a day so it doesn't seem so daunting. Just say, right, today I'm going to check in with, every thought. I'm going to try at least, not get distracted. And just check in and just see how often, those thoughts are coming up. They're sort of sense or flavour of those thoughts, if they're to do with, oh, I'm not able to, or I'm too busy, or, whatever it is, just keep checking, keep challenging them, because I think you're absolutely right. All those doubts and beliefs they're just thoughts, and they're really dangerous sometimes.
Yeah. Well, they can be quite binding if you believe it,
Yeah, yeah.
So
It's
just keep,
about
and
belief.
sometimes you just got to keep challenging the thoughts. At some point, it won't feel binding anymore.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I remember just before this initial process started with sort of more self-inquiry. So just before I think I'd met this friend, I'd bought Eckhart Tolle's book, and I think the title of his first chapter is something like "You are not your mind, or you are not your thoughts." And I remembered like opening the book, thinking, right, I'm gonna read this. I opened it and I just got stuck with the title. I just sat there, it just blew me away, and I just sat there with that for ages, and I can't even remember if I even started the book, because that was just it. And that's, again, I think just keep on believing that. Keeping on believing that will help in this process for sure.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. I think this was a very, very good conversation. People are going to get a lot out of it. I know that already. Um, and yeah, it was really, really nice sharing. And thanks for your honesty, vulnerability, directness, and sharing this story.
Yeah, well, thank you to you, Angela. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. It's been really useful for me as well. I'm so sorry that everyone's stuck with a horrible image of me scratching my face on the video. Hopefully
It
they
probably
can.
won't come through on the video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's just been such a pleasure. Yeah, and I look forward to sort of any future conversations or the sort of next journey. Yeah, just very appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you.